The Triathlon Show 277. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Lesley Paterson. Lesley is a coach and multiple world champion across XTERRA and ITU Cross-Triathlon. And today we discuss her general training and coaching philosophy and principles, as well as some specific advice relating to XTERRA and Cross-Triathlon. But do keep in mind that we have a lot of general discussions around training here that applies to everybody. So it's not just for people interested in racing XTERRA or Cross-Triathlon. Actually, I need to explain a little mishap that I had during this episode as the interviewer, and that is that I actually had the wrong printout with questions in front of me from another interview that I had conducted earlier in the same day, I believe. So it took me a long while to realize that I was surprised by how few questions I had asked specifically around XTERRA and Cross-Triathlon. And so you may have to wait for quite a bit within this interview until we get to those parts, even though through the general flow of the conversation, we do include XTERRA and Cross-Triathlon references pretty much throughout the interview, I would say. But the actual keeping to the script was a bit not as planned, so to say. And you'll notice where I noticed that mistake in the episode. But anyway, in the end, I think we managed to cover pretty much everything that I had wanted to cover and more, even though we could have probably gone on for a lot longer still, because it was a really interesting chat. But let's get to that right after thanking our sponsors, Precision Hydration. If you want to race XTERRA or off-road triathlon, as Lesley says in the interview, it might look like an Olympic distance race when you look at the distances, but in many ways, due to the additional duration of the race in the off-road environment, it is much like a half-distance race in many ways, including nutrition and hydration being really, really critical, even more so than in a normal Olympic distance race. And in particular, let's say you want to go to the World Championships in Maui, for example, then that's obviously an environment where you will be sweating profusely. And in those sorts of circumstances, long race and hot environment, then replacing your electrolytes is really crucial. And Precision Hydration is here to help you do that. They make electrolytes in different strengths that you can match to how much sweat you're losing and your individual sweat sodium concentration level. Go to precisionhydration.com and get a free hydration plan, and that will give you an estimate for how much sodium you lose in your sweat, and then you can select your electrolyte supplement, whether it should be a light or medium or a strong supplement based on that. And you can get 15% off your order of Precision Hydration electrolytes with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Roka are the leading manufacturers of wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. Let's do a product highlight here today, and this time I want to talk a little bit about the Gen 2 Elite Aero tri-suit. This is a tri-suit that I've raced in a lot. It is based, as usual, on fantastic R&D work, including wind tunnel testing, naturally. So the suit is designed to balance aerodynamics, comfort, and race function in a fantastic way. And I've noticed one additional thing that is really, really crucial. It has been extremely durable through plenty of racing, and not to mention training as well. And just like the Roka wetsuits, it comes with the arms up technology that helps you retain full mobility through your shoulders in the swimming element of your racing. Go to roka.com/TTS to get 20% off your order of any Roka products. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Lesley Paterson. Today's guest on That Triathlon Show is Lesley Paterson. Lesley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. I actually recently ran a survey with listeners, and a theme that came up with many of the people taking that survey was there is a good strong subset of listeners that want some more XTERRA content. And
that's great.
Yeah, and that's why you're here today. Even though, as we might talk about later, we have some other topics that we might return to.
Sure.
But first, start by just introducing yourself to the audience.
Yeah, so my name is Lesley Paterson, and I am a 5-time off-road triathlon world champion. So 3-time in XTERRA and 2-time in ITU Cross. And I am Scottish, obviously. And yeah, I have many other interests, but I've been in the sport of triathlon for a long time. It's my therapy, it's my love, it's my passion. So I'm excited to, give some good information to you guys, and hopefully have some fun in this chat.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned there your 5 world titles with that kind of storied career, and we can reveal for listeners that you were kind of on the ITU, the Olympic track in your younger years as well. So you have a very long career behind you with plenty of successes, also some disappointments, I imagine. Can you give some highlights of things that you think through your career that you did really well and that listeners might benefit from? And in contrast, also things mistakes perhaps that you made and that you wish people can learn from and not repeat?
Yeah, so many, many ups and downs. I mean, literally, I've been in the sport of triathlon since I was about 13 years old, so long, long time. And so I think some of the highlights, obviously, when you have dreamt of being a world champion and at the top of your sport for, literally since I was 4 years old, I think, when you finally break that tape and win your for me, my first world title, I think it was just so special. The race itself was arduous. It was the first time in my career I'd ever had a flat tire in a race, and I was in the best shape of my life. I was in pole position coming out of the water, and I had a flat tire on the mountain bike, and thought, I just don't believe this. And I really think that was a pivotal moment in my entire career of saying, I'm faced with this obstacle. Am I going to use it, or am I going to just give up? And I decided I can fix this. I can get going. I've lost several minutes, but let's just go as hard as I can and see what happens. I'm fit. I'm healthy. I love what I do. Let's get out here, have fun, and really hit it hard. And I did that and came off the bike, I think, in 5th or 6th position, something like 10 minutes down on the leader, going into the run, and ended up running into first position with half a mile to go. So it really was a lesson to me about dealing with adversity and keep pushing on, right? So I think that was a huge highlight to me. And then, some of the downfalls, as some of the listeners might know from my history, I've dealt with a lot of health issues. So I was diagnosed with Lyme's disease in 2010. And that's been a very, very hard road along the way, just the ups and downs, the depression, the anxiety. Can I ever do this sport again? How can I get back to my top level? What does it mean to me? Why do I do it? All of these kind of existential questions to do with sport.
Yeah, and how did you deal with those tough moments?
I think it really boils down to your why, because when you've been at the pinnacle of your career and, pretty much better than I ever thought I could be, and then it's all taken away from you, you develop a lot of gratitude for what you can do. And I think that can be lost when you do get success. All you strive for is the outcome instead of the process. You're so worried that you can repeat this outcome again, that you can stay on top, that you can be as good as everyone expects you to be, that as good as you expect yourself to be. So all of that, you have to reframe that, and you have to get back to gratitude for what you can do, and drilling down into the why of why you do what you do. And for me, it really is about being outside in the environment, about experiencing my body moving through space, and about pushing to the edge of my boundaries, whatever that is, given my health, given my injury, given my, just where I'm at in any given day. And that's sort of the beauty, that line that you cross on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's really fantastic to listen to, that little paragraph there. I loved it. But those were tough moments in your career that you dealt with. What about, do you have like some literal mistake that you made, or like something that maybe you repeatedly made and that now in hindsight you wish that you had done differently, something that you can point to and that you think a lot of other people might make and you want to warn them from doing?
I would say it is overtraining, just always pushing. And I think that was because of kind of a low confidence on my part. One of my biggest assets is how hard that I work. And I saw my results as being the reason for this the reason for that was a hard work. And so I therefore thought that, I have to just work that hard all the time. And as a consequence, I've kind of pushed to the edge. And it's a double-edged sword, right? I always remember listening to Alistair Brownlee say, I'd rather have had, 2 or 3 years of absolute excellence than 10 or 15 years of mediocrity. So I think you're always balancing on that edge. And to be truly great, you have to push over the edge sometimes. But I think I've probably done that a little bit too much. And then the other piece of it, and I think this is, being a female athlete as well, is just the body image issues that come with that, the eating disorders and the sort of relationship that I have with food, both through my illness and through the sport. That's been a huge, challenge for me, because you get addicted to that level of control. And so your sport becomes not just performance based, it becomes kind of this addictive thing in your life. So there's a lot of sort of mental issues that come with that too.
So we're going a bit off script here, actually, and I hope I'm not prying too deep. But since you brought that up, did you suffer from an actual eating disorder, or did you have like general body image issues yourself? What was sort of the extent of that?
I would say that it's probably more disordered eating than an eating disorder. And again, it's kind of a spectrum, right? But I've never sort of been clinically diagnosed or taken it to some super duper extremes. I think it's just more body image issues and disordered eating. And I think sport really comes in the middle of that, because it's a way of controlling some of that. And it's something I wrestle with all the time. And luckily, I've got a wonderful husband that is also a sports psychologist, right? So he can really help me with that. But I think a lot of female athletes and male athletes deal with that, because our endurance sport, is just littered with those pictures of, emaciated athletes and how awesome they are and how wonderful they look and all the rest of it. And that comes at a price. And again, especially for female athletes, it comes at the price of hormone damage and issues and all sorts of other bodily function issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that might be on that spectrum of disordered eating or maybe just general body image issues, what are a couple of things that you've found helps you get on the right track with that you can share?
Well, I think it's, again, kind of drilling down on the why you do your sport. And hopefully there's other reasons rather than just body weight. And so focusing on those elements, for me, a huge piece also is the social element when I'm training. So having those friends and family around you, so that there's a lot of joy in your sport and the focus is taken away from sort of sport as a way to lose weight or be lean. And then also for me, it's kind of the performance aspects. So take away what my body looks like and more about how do I best perform in my sport. And best performing means having a healthy body. And that doesn't always mean being 5% body fat. So it's just kind of reframing health and sport and the relationship that you have with those. And then the other piece for me has been to have other hobbies, other things that really get me passionate about life that take me away from that sort of obsessive compulsive sport or drive. And as you know, I'm in the world of films, so screenwriting and creativity and lots of other cool things that take me into other worlds and kind of take me out of that obsessive compulsive state.
Yeah, no, that's all really great. And one thing that I can add here, I've had a discussion with a couple of athletes about weight and its impact, positive and negative. And I'm going to do some hand gestures here. The podcast listeners might not see it, but basically, if there is such a thing as an optimal weight, as soon as you go below it, you get a very steep decline in performance. But go above it, you have a very slight decline. So actually, like the risk with trying to find your optimal weight is that you actually find it and go even a little bit below it, and then the cost of that is just dramatically
very, very
increased. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's also cycling your body weight, right? Especially as a fit female athlete, but allowing yourself to put that weight on in more of the off seasons, and again, sort of nourish your system so that when you are depleting it or at least stressing it come, that race, you're at least kind of backing off at the other times to nourish your body again.
Yeah, definitely. Now, so these days you are working as a coach, among other things, and let's dig into that a little bit. What does your coaching and training philosophy look like? What are kind of your fundamental principles of endurance sports coaching?
So definitely. So I co-coach with my husband as well. He's a sports physiologist as well as sports psychologist. So, which is wonderful. We work the mind and the body. And as you guys might know, we wrote a book together called The Brave Athlete, which is kind of a brain mental model of how the thoughts and feelings that you have, why you have them, and different ways to combat that. But and that drills down into our philosophy, which is you're more than a data point, right? It's the mental and the physical together and combined that really makes you the best that you can be. And as a consequence, the way that we coach our athletes, we love to get to know our athletes, to really talk to them. And a lot of it is about, what is their life like around triathlon? Because if we don't really know that, it becomes difficult to coach on a day-to-day basis and really get the best out of that person. So it really is coaching the whole person. And then the other main part of our philosophy is that strength is the cornerstone to speed. So we really believe that muscle durability is the key to endurance sport as a foundation for speed. I'm not saying that strength is everything, but as a foundation, it's absolutely critical. And that was the real linchpin in making me the athlete that I became. And then all of the successes we've had with our athletes have been founded on that principle.
What sort of strength are we talking about here? Are we talking about like literal weight training, or are we talking about the kind of strength that people refer to with, let's say, Arthur Lydiard having his runners go out and do 100-mile weeks in the hills? That's one kind of strength for one
absolutely.
thing. But what is it you refer to?
Yep, it's across the board. There's many different types of strength. So yes, we love our athletes to be in the gym, lifting heavier weights, doing things like deadlifts and squats and step ups and things that are recruiting those prime muscle movers for power and strength. Also functional strength, so multi-plane movement strength, where it's about tendons and ligaments and efficiency and economy of motion, biomechanics, things like that. And then it's applied strength. So on the bike, we do what's called torque training, the very low cadence, almost like weight training on your bike, anywhere from 35 RPMs to 60 RPMs at varying intensities. Doing a lot of standing drills as well, in fact, to recruit your glutes, to get your core stability, and then to help your running off the bike. And then on the running side of stuff, having athletes do a lot of form hills. I think the perception is that hills are for strength if your course is hilly, if the course you're going to be racing on is hilly, or if you want to, they always have to go high, really high intensity up hills. But we try and do form hill repeats where it's about, the muscle recruitment patterns while you're running. Again, the muscle durability, the form aspect. We do a lot of plyometrics and running drills off the bike as well. The mental toughness of that hill, and then converting that to speed. So again, using all of that strength as this platform to then build the speed on top of that as we're coming in towards a race, or race specificity, at least as we're coming in towards a race.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And on the first point you mentioned there with getting to know the athlete and their life around triathlon, perhaps that is a good segue into discussing what are some pieces of advice for fitting triathlon training into what is typically for most age groupers a busy life, even without triathlon, and then you try to do a swim, bike, and run on top of that. What advice can you give around that?
So I think, obviously, if you're limited on time, making sure you're maximizing every minute of that time. And even if that means breaking it up into smaller chunks that can be, fitted into your life. So for example, we call it habit stacking in the habit world, which is, say you don't have that much time, but you really want to be able to do some core activities or things that are going to help just your form. Then doing very small amounts of that, maybe paired with having your coffee. So as your coffee brews, you've got 5 or 6 minutes to bang in, per day, just a little bit of core. So for example, my husband and I put together a core routine. It's a workout video, 6min6pack.com. So it's 6 minutes of kind of core activity. So if you pair that with something like the brewing of your coffee, then at least you've gotten it in. So there's lots of little hacks like that you can do to fit things in. And then it's about, quite often, if you only have short periods of time to train, so some of our athletes, maybe it's only 6 to 8 hours a week, you have to do kind of higher intensity work in order to get enough load to get the fitness gains. So being specific with those types of workouts. And then with athletes of ours that have family, they have young kids and things like that, having novel ways to kind of have them be a part of it. So for example, quite a lot of our athletes, as they're running, their kids will be riding their bike and handing them water, or they'll do multiple loops around where they live so their kids can see them or be out walking. Or, maybe they meet for breakfast and they're running to the place where they're having breakfast, things like that. And with things like Zwift racing now, your kids could be in there watching and cheering and having fun with the gamification of it while you're in there doing your workouts. There's just so many novel ways to make your family a part of your life and then to fit things in around already existing, business, tough careers, things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there are many ways to be creative around that and try to maximize what you're doing. I love what you mentioned there with habit stacking. It's a conversation I had just yesterday with one of my athletes, actually, around how to fit in strength and conditioning, those short little circuits, but that tend to be more difficult to get done, funnily enough, rather than swimming, biking, and running. And basically what we talked about was just that make it a habit stack with your bike and run workouts, that your bike and run workout doesn't start with cycling or running. It starts with doing that core work or the strength and conditioning work, and then you get to your run and bike, and basically then having that time available. So if it's a 45-minute run and a 15-minute circuit, then that's a 60-minute slot that needs to be available. So always stacking things. That's a good trick. And what you mentioned there with doing more intensity when you're time limited, let's dig into that a little bit. So if you have 6 to 8 hours, as you mentioned, what can you just give basically an overview of what a week might look like in terms of how many swims, bikes, and runs, and how you might distribute the intensity in that week?
Yep. So say you've got 8 hours in the week to train, if you can, and again, it really depends on where your strengths or weaknesses lie. I think that if you're a really strong biker and poor runner, or a really strong biker and a poor swimmer, or something like that, you might want to have a little bit more emphasis in one of those sports, at least periodically or for phases. So in a strength phase, for example, which might last, say, 6 to 8 weeks, before we do a speed block, it might be that you've got let's say it's evenly distributed and you've got 2 swims, 2 bikes and 2 runs per week, with maybe a short brick run off one of the bikes as well. So that's kind of 2.5 runs. So 2 of those bike sessions would probably do some kind of sweet spot, sustained or even tempo type work where the cadence is not too low, so say 60 RPMs, and then we might do another more high intensity. It might even, as long as they're ready for that strength work, sort of threshold to VO2 type work, shorter intervals where we're really working high power at low RPMs, say 45 RPMs, where we're doing some seated, some standing. If they can do it on a hill, all the better. If they have to do it indoors, just cranking up the resistance. And probably one of those a little bit longer, so closer to say 2.5 hours. And then we'd have one of those runs off the bike where we would maybe in the strength phase do a bunch of plyometrics off the bike, which is kind of like running. So we'd have some running intervals or maybe some hills within that. But it would also kind of do the functional strength at the same time. So they wouldn't have to do as much as that, and that would reduce the time. And then running wise, we'd have them do a good solid hill workout, but maybe within a longer run. So for example, the run might be 75 minutes. And we'd have them do the hills at the end of the run. So they're a little bit tired and we're forcing good form on tired legs. So it mimics almost like running off the bike. Little tricks like that just to help. The other run might be some more sustained kind of tempo type work on rolling terrain. So you've got the high intensity on the hills, then you've got the more sustained on rolling terrain. Swim wise, one of those sessions would be definitely VO2 max type work. A lot of recovery, very, very high intensity. And the reason that we would do that is you can actually get better form if you're doing shorter high intensity intervals because you're not fatigued as much. So working on form is easier. But also,
would you basically cap the length of the intervals at,
yep,
I don't know, 50 or... Yeah,
probably 50 initially. So it'll be either 25 or 50s. And again, like even a minute rest in between the 50s or 45 seconds rest or 30 seconds rest in between the 25s, focusing on power and the VO2, maybe even bumping it up to 75 to get real VO2. And that's great because what it does is it transfers that high intensity aerobic capacity fitness across into other sports as well without the load that you get when you're running and biking on the musculature. So we definitely do one swim like that. And then the other swim probably sustained threshold work. So the swimming would be all high intensity with some drills in between. So certainly in things like a threshold set, saying you're doing a classic 20 by 100s of threshold, maybe you'd stop and, you do 10 100s and then in the middle you do some drills and then you do another 10 100s, something like that. So you're always kind of being cognizant of the form piece as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great explanation of a typical week. And I think that what I would just add there to it is that when interpreting a week like that, it's kind of important to understand the context of it. It sounds like, you're doing something of quote unquote quality every single session, but a lot of that actually, like the strength work on the bike, the kind of longer strength work can be quite aerobic. And
very, very much so.
I actually just personally got back from a bike ride with 4 by 8 minute hill reps at low cadence, 45 to 55. And my heart rate never broke 135, I think, through any of those. Right. So kind of just mostly at the high end of zone 2, a little bit dipping into zone 3 from time to time. But basically in a 90-minute ride, I had 10 minutes of time in zone 2 from a heart rate perspective, even though power was higher than that. So I think,
which is great.
So I think that, so the point with that week is that you can do a lot of quality with the way that it's designed, also the running hills, the form hills, and so on. You don't necessarily need to do a whole lot of them. You can get a lot of bang for buck there. So there's a frequency of quality in there, but overall it still sounds like a good, well-balanced week. Yeah. And then ensuring that there's good recovery, right? So maybe you do a 2-week block like that, and then you have a good 1 week where it's unstructured and it's a lot more chill and it's a lot sort of more open to the athlete themselves just to kind of let loose or really hold them back. It depends on what type of athlete that they are. There's just so much variety in there depending on the athlete themselves. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the specific disciplines. So you came into triathlon from a running background, I think, and had to learn how to swim the hard way, if I'm not mistaken. So what advice would you give to athletes that most of us are in the same position, that swim is the weakness, but regardless, what are your main swimming tips? Yeah, so I think it really is twofold. One, obviously, technique for swimming is critical, right? So having someone that you really can trust, that you believe in, that can give you good feedback on your swimming technique. And you can do this remotely now. There's a lot of swimming coaches that you can just have someone video you while you're swimming. So walk along poolside with their phone, take some video of you from the side and then from the front. And if you have an underwater camera like a GoPro, great, a bit of that too. Send it
it to a coach and they can analyze it. I mean, I do some analysis for my athletes, but I also have swim specific coaches that are great too. And then you sort of can come away with good drills. But I do think that in order to apply the good form, you have to have the fitness to do it. And that's the challenge, right? Because if you say, hey, I'm just going to do all technique, because technique's so important. The trouble is that if you really can't get through 100 without, huffing and puffing severely, then you're not going to be able to apply the form. So we still need a fitness piece in there. We still need to get the heart rate up and have the aerobic capacity to deal with, having good form. I love masters groups for some workouts, not for all workouts. But just having that group mentality, where you can really get pushed and push yourself and have that social aspect to it is wonderful. And then in terms of swimming, it really is frequency. I would rather my athletes, if they could get to the pool frequently, having, 3 to 4 30-minute sessions than 2 1-hour sessions. Because it's about the frequency with which you get that stimulus of being in the water and understanding, we call it that feel for the water, which I'm sure a lot of you guys out there have heard about before. Another aspect to this which really changed my training was strength work specific to swimming, and that can be challenging to achieve just in the gym. Maybe you've got swim cords, that's great, but I actually have what's called a VASA ergometer, which is a swim bench, almost like a rowing machine, but you're on your front, you have paddles, it measures wattage, it measures meters covered. And the wonderful thing about this is I actually have a mirror below me and a mirror to the side of me. So I get real-time feedback in terms of my stroke. Okay, it's not in the water, but at least I can see the muscle recruitment patterns, because when you're swimming, of course, you don't get that real-time feedback more often than not. You're doing your length, then you're getting your feedback. You're doing your swim, then you stop, then you get your feedback, and then you try and apply it again. And not only that, because I'm able to recruit the right muscles and make them nice and strong, I then get in the water, and all of a sudden the feel for the water, the way that I grab the water is a lot more powerful. And that's been incredibly helpful for me.
Yeah, those are some really great pieces of advice there. What would you say is a go-to workout that you prescribe often, maybe more often than most other workouts?
I would have said there's 2 different workouts I would say that are my keys. The longer ones, I love 400s that mix in drills with hard work. So you actually do the drills pretty hard. So we'll do stuff like 50 clenched fist drill, sprinting, and then 50 easy breath holding. And we'll keep repeating that for 400. So sets like that, where you're getting endurance, you're getting a bit of intensity, you're getting form all at the same time is really, really cool. I love those kind of workouts. And then my other favorite one is my 50s workout. It's a pretty classic set that a lot of triathletes, I'm sure they do it. It's the 40 50s, where you start off with 16 50s every 4th one, maximal effort, on less rest. And then you do 12 50s every 3rd one hard. Then you do 8 every other. Then you finish off with 4 all out, with a lot more rest. And that's a pretty cool set. Yeah,
I think Paul Newsom from Swim Smooth calls that the spike set, I believe.
Yeah.
That's a classic, definitely. What about cycling then, if we move on to your key piece of advice for cycling?
Mm-hmm. So I think cycling more than any other discipline, the strength is a critical piece. And the torque training for me revolutionized my cycling. Because I came from a running background, I had wonderful aerobic development. But what was happening on the bike was I couldn't get my heart rate up. And a large piece of that was because I didn't have the musculature, I didn't have the strength to stress the cardio system. And I think that at any point in the season, right, it's like this kind of balance, this push and pull between strength and almost like aerobic capacity. And you peak at the point at which your strength is just starting to come off the boil and your aerobic capacity is absolutely critical, and that's when you're peaking. But then what happens if you try and sustain that, then your strength falls away and you no longer have the strength to keep stressing that cardio system. So that's when I come back and revisit strength pieces again, so the low torque training on climbing. And so I'll have my athletes break up their season in 2 generally. So we'll do a bunch of this strength work across across the winter. We'll come into race season with all our speed work. We'll hit a good block of racing for 2 or 3 months, and then we'll go back and we'll revisit the strength work for the fall races. So that's generally how I periodize their training protocols.
Yeah, that's really good. And how do you do any specific training with regard to off-road triathlon and XTERRA? Yep. What might differ for athletes focusing on that compared to just normal on-road triathlon?
Absolutely. So I'll do a lot of functional strength work so that I have the balance to be able to move the mountain bike around on trails and the body around while I'm running on trails. I'll be out in the trails in the winter season at least once a week. Normally I'll do actually an aerobic ride out on the trails, because what I love to do is to give myself a heart rate restriction on a course that's pretty tough. So I have to slow down the cadence and slow down the effort to get over the terrain, right? And it forces good balance, good form. It's aerobic because I'm keeping my heart rate lower, and it requires sort of strength to be able to do that. So you're kind of encapsulating technique into an actual session, which is pretty cool. Then when I come towards race seasons, I'll do things like mountain bike races. But what I'll do, I have probably about 3 or 4 different race courses that I have created with different terrain, depending on the terrain of the race that I'm building up towards. And I'll mimic those race courses, and I'll do things like, I call them hot laps, right? So maybe I have a course where the race course is 15 minutes long. So it's almost like a 15-minute race intensity effort, but on a similar terrain as my race course. And I'll maybe do 4 or 5 of those with a break in between each one. And I'll get people out there with me, racing with me, and all that good stuff.
All right. So is it fair to say that in the base training period, you still recommend going out on the trails once per week or so, but keeping it mostly aerobic? But then when you get to the specific preparation, then you start to try to get it as specific as possible and try to do race intensity specifically on terrain that as close as possible, as far as you can get it, mimics the race course.
Big time. Plus as well, a lot of athletes don't realize that they can actually ride their mountain bike on the road.
Yeah.
And it's, if you're wanting to get specificity and then you feel like you can't get that in on a trail. So say you have a session that is, hey, my coach wants me to do 10 by 2 minute hills or something like that. Well, get out on your mountain bike so you're in that position, do your intensity on a hill outside on the road, and then finish up your ride on some trails for the fun of it, for the technique. And there's so many different ways to kind of combo it.
Yeah, perfect. So we already mentioned a couple of good sessions there. Do you have any other go-to session that you want to highlight on the bike?
I would say on the bike, I love doing the odd crazy workout, which is all about mental toughness. So we're lucky here in California, we have some big climbs. So every now and again, maybe it's once a month, I'll come up with a crazy workout, which is something like, we have a climb here that's 4,500 feet, and I've done it 3 times in a row. So I'll do something that is about kind of a mental challenge. And that just really helps build that, we call it the anterior cingulate cortex, the thing that assesses how things feel in your body, and it sort of makes it grow bigger and stronger, essentially.
All right, cool. And then moving on to the run, what's your advice around the run part of training?
So, technique is so important because it's about efficiency. And the more efficient you are, then you're going to be able to cover ground faster with a lower heart rate. And that's really what it is that we're looking for here. Also injury prevention. I think that's so key. And I think if you just bang in the miles and hit the track all the time, you're not going to be either strong enough to cope with the power that's going through your feet and pushing through the ground, but also your propensity for injury goes up. So making sure you're doing a lot of functional strength, that's what really took my running. Functional strength work, that's what really took my running to the next level. And then for me specifically, doing a lot of hill reps really helped for the muscle durability, because I found that I didn't have the strength to sustain across long periods of time. So I'd do a lot of plyometrics and hills off the bike in that strength phase, and then I convert that to speed. And I love to use a treadmill as well, not all the time, but for some key workouts, as long as you get used to it, especially off the bike. It's like a training partner to do some high intensity, high leg turnover work.
Yeah, that's really good. And can we go into some specifics on a couple of key sessions again? Perhaps one that I would like to hear about is the hill reps. Again, if you can specify one of your favorite hill rep workouts, and then maybe something else.
Yep. So I have a really steep, I think it's 18 to 20% grade,
Wow.
shorter hill where I am. So at the bottom of the hill, I'll do squat jumps. So I do 20 like really low squat jumps to kind of load the leg. And then for the first half, and then I'll go straight into the hill rep, which is about, I think, 90 seconds long. And for the first 45 seconds, I'm actually just doing hill bounds. So think of a triple jumper before they do the double jump and they're doing a bound. So I bound like that for, 30, 45 seconds. And then I break into kind of a high cadence, a sort of speed power section to finish it off and then jog back. So it's a really fun way of developing form, technique, muscle durability, plus some, you build up into higher intensity, get that aerobic capacity building as well.
That's really cool. It sounds like a mixture of Steve Magnus's strength circuits and Arthur Lydiard's hill bounding period.
yeah, exactly. It's a good old combo.
Yeah, awesome. And do you have another run that you want to highlight, something different than the hill work?
Yep. So what I love to do off a hard, normally it's a group ride I'll do this off. So as I'm coming up to races, I love to do we have some wonderful group rides here in San Diego. They're incredibly high intensity. And when you look at my power files, the amount of kind of VO2 work, threshold work I'm getting is incredible. And I'll do that, and it can be anywhere from sort of 2 to 4 hours worth of work. And then I'll do a treadmill, a high intensity treadmill run off the bike, which is 45 to 60 minutes. And I call it my 3-2-1 session. So it's 3 minutes of kind of 10K pace, then a minute easy, then 2 minutes of 5K pace, then 1 minute easy, then 1 minute just all out, and then 3 minutes easy. And I'll do that kind of 4 or 5 times through. It's pretty insane.
That sounds very fun.
Yeah, when you're done, it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and in terms of the run part of off-road triathlon, how do you advise people take that into account? I mean, regular runs on trails as much as possible, I guess. Is there anything else that you would?
Yeah, the strength again is such a huge piece, because if you don't have the muscle durability to cope with the hills that they normally throw at you with XTERRA, then you're going to cramp and you're just not going to be able to cope. Not only that, you have that sort of multi-plane movement, right? You're going over obstacles sometimes, you're just moving in different paths, kind of, slightly to the right, slightly to the left. So if you don't have the kind of core stability, the glute engagement, all of the strong muscles to be able to deal with that, you're going to cramp. So that's where the hill work is really, really important. Furthermore, the nutrition piece, that is essential when you come to XTERRA, because the intensity and the torque on your body is so high. You're redlining all the time and coming back. The duration of it, even although it looks like it's an Olympic distance triathlon, the actual impact on your body is almost more like a half Ironman. And when you're mountain biking, of course, you're so distracted by everything that you have to do. A lot of athletes forget to, get the calories in and to get the electrolytes and fluids in. So what I always recommend to athletes is pre-ride a course, have designated spots in the course where you're going to take on your nutrition. You can get your hands off the bars. I wear a camel pack so that it's easy for me to get the fluids and the nutrition in. And I'll do stuff like put my gels on the top tube of my bike. So the nutrition piece is really critical if you're going to run effectively. I mean, it's critical in any triathlon, but I think because of all of the things thrown at you on the mountain bike, most folks forget it, and as a consequence, they fall apart in the run.
Yeah, and what you mentioned there with the strength part at the beginning makes perfect sense for XTERRA in particular. But there, I would just like to add that even if we're talking about sprint distance triathlon, running off the bike in a triathlon, even the sprint, is a strength challenge. It's not a speed challenge.
100%.
So I think that all of those workouts really apply 100% to any triathlon distance, on road or off road.
Yeah, 100%.
Then you mentioned a little bit about periodization already, with how you structure the year into basically a strength phase and then the speed phase that falls into a competitive phase. Can you just elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so it really depends on what type of athlete you are. Is it XTERRA or is it Ironman? We coach a lot of Ironman athletes or half Ironman athletes. So generally what we'll do is strength, and then we'll do speed, and then we'll do race specificity. So we'll do the strength, and as we go through that phase, we build up the intensity of the strength intervals. So we'll be going from, sort of a lower tempo effort, a little bit like the intervals you spoke about today. And then we'll actually start to do those more towards your sweet spot, your threshold. And then maybe even we'll put some sort of VO2 at that kind of strength phase right towards the back end of it. Then we'll transition into more of just classic threshold VO2 type work with a little bit of sustained tempo in there, just actually at a strength, kind of still incorporating a little bit of strength protocol so that we're maintaining some of that strength while doing all of the speed work. And then we'll go into race specificity. So certainly if you're an Ironman athlete, we're then building out your endurance as we kind of move towards that race. If you're XTERRA, it's race specific intensities. So yeah, strength, nice high intensity, then race specificity is how we periodize it. And then we generally will have 2 phases in a season. So we'll do a nice phase like that, hit some races for 3 months, do the same phase again, then hit another few, 3 months of races.
Yeah, all right, perfect. And we talked a little bit already about intensity as it pertains to time-crunched athletes, but just in general, what's your view on balancing volume and intensity? In particular, perhaps this is an important question with athletes that have perhaps more time available to train. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's such an individual thing because athletes can handle different intensity at different times, a different load on their body. I myself, obviously, I'm an elite athlete, right? I can actually cope with a lot of intensity and a lot of volume at the same time. And I've trained my body to do that over years. And as a good coach once said to me, more is more, but only if you can cope with it, right? Yeah. So, the trouble is most people can't. And that's not just the physical piece of it, but the mental side of it as well. So I think it's looking at all of the metrics that we have and understanding the load that is on an athlete's body and how they seem to be coping with it. We have all sorts of wonderful things like HRV that we can track. We have mood diaries and just corresponding with the athlete to see how they're doing mentally. But more often than not, most of our athletes are going to want to push too hard. They have that A-type personality. So I think as a coach, the accountability on me to actually hold them back and give them good, proper recovery phases is what's really, really critical. So for us, it's just a fine balance, right, of how much we can push, how much intensity with how much volume, and obviously where that is in relation to the race.
So you mentioned HRV and mood diaries. I'm curious, given Simon's background especially, do you use tools like the profile of mood states on a regular basis, or is it, do you do that or other similar tools?
Definitely we do, and we have them uploaded onto Training Peaks, in their comments. And that's really, really helpful for us. And it's helpful for them too, just to reassess when things were going well and when they weren't. Because I think when you're an athlete in the moment, you think you're feeling a certain way, and then you look back and you're like, oh, actually, maybe not. It's easy to kind of self-sabotage or change it in your own mind as to where you're at in any given time. And then again, it's purely just having a communication pathway with our athletes, making sure that we're talking to them and listening to them, and kind of prying information out of them. That would be one of the single best things to help an athlete maximize their potential and not push it too hard, not push it too far, but also push it enough.
Yeah. And when it comes to execution of the different types of workouts, so if we start with the low intensity workouts, for example, how do you like to prescribe them? For example, do you like to work with heart rate or with power and pace or RPE? And what is kind of your general prescription in terms of how hard or how easy should they be? those easy or endurance workouts?
So generally what we'll do with our athletes is when they come on board with them, we'll do some kind of testing, just basic testing to get some either heart rate zones, power zones, or some kind of distance. Most athletes will require them to have at minimum a heart rate monitor just so they understand the intensity. And even if they have an issue with that, because we have had some athletes that only like to use perceived exertion because they've gotten too obsessed with the data, we'll have them do stuff like wear their heart rate monitor or power meter and actually tape it over so they cannot see it, but we can. And then we'll do some questionnaires with them about how hard they thought they were going relative to what the actual value tells us. And that sees where that discrepancy is. So, generally at minimum, we like a heart rate monitor that's pretty cheap to get, just so that we can sort of at least have some sense of the intensities that we're working on. And we'll create heart rate zones for the bike and the run based off some testing that we do. Obviously, the gold standard for biking is a power meter. So anyone that comes to us with a power meter, that's great. It just gives us more data to assess how any given session is impacting them, how they're doing across periods of time, along with the feedback that they're giving us. But we don't get too obsessed with data because it's not as accurate as it is. It's also inaccurate. It's based off of lots of different formulas that, I can have a piece of data tell me, hey, listen, you're tired today, or hey, listen, you feel great today, and I just feel like shit, for whatever reason. Maybe it's hormonal, maybe it's the argument I had with my husband or whatnot. So you've got to take it with a pinch of salt and just be like, okay, it's important, but it's not everything.
Yeah. Do you prescribe the workouts by, for example, on the bike, by power, if the athlete comes with a power meter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. So everything is kind of zone based, right? So they have their zones, their power zones and their heart rate zones. And a session will be, there'll be a warm up, then there'll be a main set, which is, say it's your 4 by 8 minutes on a climb at, 45 RPMs in this zone. So they're very detailed sessions that you're getting. And then we'll also have sessions where it's a free run session. So for some athletes that struggle with too much structure, we make sure there's sessions in there where they can just kind of let loose and go for it. And we can sort of see what it is that they do, but they need a bit of freedom too.
Yeah. And final question on that topic, what is kind of the, if an athlete comes home from an endurance run and they say, oh, this felt easy, but you look at the data and the speed was maybe a bit higher, it was in zone 3 rather than in zone 2 for most of the time, but they actually said that, well, it felt really easy, I could speak with my body and everything. What to you is the gold standard? Is it the RPE, the athlete's feedback, or is it the actual data, the pace, or the heart rate?
I do think it's a little bit of a combination of both, right? In so much as if an athlete is very, very fresh and they've come off a recovery week, then that, high zone 2, low in zone 3 is probably going to feel really easy and their heart rate's going to get up quickly. So kind of just letting them settle into that and enjoy that feeling rather than be, oh, you have to run, at zone 2, you have to. Now, if they're coming back from injury, if they have a long history of overtraining, if we know that they've been tired, then we have to have some pretty honest conversations with them. Like, listen, that might have felt easy, but we see a pattern with you that this is what you do. And then we hit you with a hard session, you can't cope with it because you're always kind of going moderate, or look at your injury history, you always get injured or you always get overtrained. So while you think it might be easy, there's a reason we're giving you this. So let's look at all of the pieces and explain it to you so that you understand. But then at some point, the athlete has to take responsibility for that. And we give them the information. We say, listen, this is why we're having you do this. This is what we've noticed in your past. But at the end of the day, this is your training. You've got to do what's happy for you. As long as you know what might happen if you continue to push a little bit harder than we really want you to, that's okay. But it's your decision.
Yeah, that is a really great answer. I love that. And it's funny that question is definitely one that you can't answer that this is the best or that is the best. It's basically a question that invites somebody to elaborate on a topic. And I think that the way you did that there was absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
But let's move on to the high intensity workouts. First of all, one thing that I'm always very curious to hear, is what's your opinion on when you're doing some sort of high intensity work intervals, whether they be above a threshold or below, it doesn't really matter, but a hard workout with intervals. Do you tend to prescribe or tell athletes to, look, you should maybe leave 1 rep left in the tank, you should have a little bit left in you and not go completely all out or be completely wasted at the end of the session? Or do you think that those sessions also have their time and place, and it's okay for athletes to really empty the tank in those hard workouts?
I think, again, you've got to do a bit of everything. So we want a diverse athlete that can mentally and physically cope with any scenario that comes their way. So we have the athletes that always finish with something left in the tank because there's a lot of fear there. And in that regard, sometimes I'll get them to go out and say, give me everything. I don't care if you completely blow up and have to walk home. We just want to mentally and physically take you to that place so that you can sort of face that fear and overcome it. Other athletes that just always do that, we want to hold them back, right? So I think it's knowing the athlete and how they generally will do things and say, let's work to the contrary of that so that we can make you as diverse as possible. So I think there's a time and place to really actually do every style of session.
Yeah, that's great. And similarly to the question on prescription for low intensity workouts, do you still tend to prescribe the power zones, pace zones for those high intensity workouts? Is that kind of the main prescription you give the athletes?
Yeah, and again, it depends on how short the intervals are, because if we're doing sort of all out intervals, while there'll be some kind of power zone, the heart rate becomes a little bit more challenging because it's maybe not long enough to simulate the heart rate. But if it's a power, yes, there will be some kind of parameter. But at the same time, I think you've kind of got to let loose when it's the really hard stuff and let them go for it to see that, to make sure that the zones you've created are not limiters, because it all depends on how well the testing went when you actually created those zones, and what scenarios were in place when the testing took place and how long ago that testing was. So how accurate, some of those values are along the way is going to dictate where those zones are. So you want some freedom to it, but at the same time, sort of some level of prescription as well. So it can be a bit woolly sometimes, but that's the balance between the mental and the physical.
All right. That's really great. I notice here, this is the first time that this has happened, but I actually printed the wrong set of questions. So I've been working off a different list of questions than the one that I had planned for you. So many of them are kind of similar, but we have missed some questions that I did have planned for you. So let's get into them here. And I guess one of the key things here is the difference between off-road triathlon and on-road triathlon. Like, we talked about the training differences, but in terms of perhaps the racing demands and the racing itself, can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so mentally it's a lot different, right? Because you're having to cope with the terrain. So there's technical aspects that you're really having to address as you go along. And there can be a lot of fear there for athletes, especially on the mountain bike portions. Oh my gosh, there's this really technical section. Am I going to be able to do it? Am I going to fall off? Am I going to hurt myself? So obviously technical practice is really important. So going out in different types of terrain, finding loops that you can do to just do again and again and again, getting some advice, getting some feedback on that, and working the technical aspects so that you feel comfortable. And then having the fitness to be able to deal with the technical stuff that's going to come across you. So your heart rate might be 180 and you're having to go over some kind of rock garden, say. So practicing high intensity at the same time as the technical is another huge piece. And then you've got things like passing athletes on trails, and you're always having to be mentally engaged during an XTERRA. There's no real time to zone out unless you've got a big long climb or a big sustained flat section. So I think it's just ensuring that you have that mental acuity at the same time as being physically stressed. So that's a real critical piece. And then, as we've talked about a lot on this podcast, is the strength. Because you're exerting so much torque and force through your body because the terrain is dictating it and you are not, for the most part, then you have to have a body that can cope with that. So some courses might have a lot of twists and turns where you're accelerating out of the corners again and again and again. So that's, multiple times you're having high forces on your muscles, like sprinting. And then maybe you have like a really short, steep, technical climb that you have to get up and over, where you're having to balance at the same time as, having a lot of torque on your legs. So there's just a lot of motion and movement and planes of motion where you're generating force through muscles and tendons that you wouldn't do if you're just in one position on the time trial bike for long periods of time. So being as diverse as possible is key. And then making sure you get your nutrition in, so that when you get to the run, a lot of XTERRA athletes struggle with the run in XTERRA because they haven't got their nutrition right, and they don't have the strength to cope with the demands of the mountain bike, then onto the run where it's equally as demanding in terms of the hills and the ins and the outs. So all of the hills, all of the plyo and the functional strength work is really your bread and butter for a good run at XTERRA.
Yeah, no, that's all really great. And about the racing aspect, what advice do you have in terms of pacing a race on the bike and on the run in particular?
So I think it's knowing your course, right? So making sure you've looked ahead at the type of course that it is. How many climbs are there? Is it twisty turny? Where do you think the demands on the course are going to be? So most XTERRA athletes will have a chance to pre-ride the course the day before, a couple of days before the actual race, which is great because it gives you a sense of where you're going to have to put out effort. Because often in the course, as I said before, the terrain dictates that kind of output. So you want to know where that is in the course and making sure you have enough energy to do so, and that you haven't burned too much, too many matches in the other sections of the course, such that you can meet that demand. So it really is about the demands of the course that is going to help you pace an XTERRA.
Yeah. What about the gear and equipment? This is, of course, a vast topic that could deserve multiple podcast episodes, but just some high-level items that you think are important to consider when it comes to the gear selection in terms of XTERRA racing.
So I think a huge part, obviously, is the bike. So a lot of athletes now are using dual suspension bikes, and the reason being is that it dampens the sort of the muscle damage. From all of the bumps, basically, because if you're on a hardtail, it's a lot harder on your body, so that you're fresher coming off onto the run. And the reason people are moving more towards dual suspension is, yes, because of that, but also because with better technology now, the bikes are lighter. So the old issues of, hey, it's so much heavier having a dual suspension bike isn't really there to the same capacity as it used to be. For smaller athletes like myself, it is still a bit of an issue. I'm only kind of 5'2", and my dual suspension bike is still kind of, about 5 pounds heavier than my hardtail bike, which for me is, I'm 100 pounds, right? So that's 5% of my body weight. That's quite a lot if it's a lot of climbing on the course. So you really have to weigh up what the course is like, and if you're lucky enough to have two different types of bikes, which I am, and especially because I'm smaller. But most kind of normal sized people will have a dual suspension bike probably, and then they'll have wheels that are either 29ers or 27.5. And for smaller athletes, the 27.5 is good, just because it allows the body position to be a little bit better and it's more nimble. The 29er is just great for rolling over things, and that's what kind of most people will have these days. So that's a bike piece of it, and then you kind of get into all sorts of things like suspension and how you measure it, and and tire choice and tire pressure, and that's a whole minefield of that. It's very course specific. It's how you like to handle your bike, testing all these things, and really you don't have to get too obsessed with it to jump into XTERRA, but as you go on, right, you pick up little bits that you sort of really can get nerdy about, which is cool. And then making sure you've got enough system on your bike for nutrition. So whether that's 2 bottle cages or a camelback or anything like that, I think those pieces of equipment are really key. Yeah,
you said you raced with a camelback, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It just it's one of those things where my bike is pretty small, so it only really fits 1 bottle on it. And you really, in most XTERRA courses, you're going to need 2 bottles. And I don't like to rely on feed stations just in case. And also as well, a lot of the courses can be, say they're twisty turny, and it's just easier to have your little straw there. And it's a children's one. It's very, very small. It's enough for kind of 1 to 2 bottles, but I'm just used to it now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really, really good to hear. Actually, that up to the level of a world champion, you can actually find that the Camelback is the best choice. I'm surprised, but now that I hear you explain it, it makes total sense in the world. So that's really cool. Then one more question around not XTERRA, but moving on back to the general sort of coaching side of things. What do you think? Can you discuss and elaborate on the art and the science of coaching and training?
Yeah, gosh, great question. The art of it comes in knowing an athlete, knowing the sport and the demands of it, and how to kind of mesh and meld the physical demands and what you want to achieve physically with what's going on mentally as well with the athlete. I think the art becomes the mental piece almost, and the science becomes the physical piece. And then creativity of how you can accomplish goals in different ways. I mentioned before about the hill reps and doing the squat jumps into the bounds, into the intensity. That's achieving a lot of different things in a different way. It's stimulating, I'll do that session off the bike when I'm already tired. So it's stimulating mental toughness in a different way. It's incorporating strength and power. It's working on form and technique. It's also working on intensity. It's segmenting so that you can keep engaged throughout the workout, given that I'm tired as I'm doing it off the bike. There's so many cool ways to achieve all of those aspects in just one session. And that's where the creativity comes in.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good answer. Then, as you mentioned, you and your husband Simon did write a book, I think a couple of years ago, The Brave Athlete, on sports psychology, and it's a great one. I listened to it 1 or 2 years ago, I think, and really enjoyed it. And we'll try to have Simon on as well, and we can discuss sports psychology on a follow-up episode. But just as a teaser to that, how important is mindset and psychology in triathlon and endurance sports?
I think it's everything, to be honest. I think without it, you're just not going to have any success or, joy or fulfillment. And really, our sport is like a form of therapy. It's a chance to understand how you work and to really, tackle some difficult inner demons that you have. So, by really digging into that, through mental training, not only are you going to maximize your potential in the sport and all of the roadblocks that you might have to, whether it's, motivation, commitment, anxiety, fear, low self-esteem, any one of those aspects, body image issues. Once you sort of have the tools and you can work on those different aspects, it's just going to make you, as a performance person, just better, right? And also as well, you can take that over into other aspects of your life, business life, family life. If it's low self-esteem or low self-worth that you're working on in your sport and you're digging into the weeds and some of that stuff and why you're making the decisions that you're making in any given year or sport or throughout a race, that's going to have an impact on your family life or your relationship. So it really is the whole package, and it really determines how successful you can be.
What are the 1 to 3 most common issues that you help your athletes with in terms of sports psychology?
Yeah, the most common one I would say is panic attacks in the swim and a lot of fear in open water swims and swim starts. So we'll do a lot of things like understanding where that fear comes from, getting to know the athlete themselves and kind of picking at the deeper levels of that. And then coming up with different breathing exercises and different kind of counting patterns and different ways to segment it, different tactics at the start of the race, things that you can do before it, building things like an alter ego, which can be applied to all of the sports. And then practicing, coming up with specific sessions where they can practice that stimulus so that they can really know how to combat it in real time. So we'll have our athletes go out with 10 or 15 of their friends, and we'll simulate the start of a race so that we can really practice and prepare for what they might come across on race day. So the swimming piece is really, really huge. The other one is, as I say, low self-esteem or low self-worth. And so feeling like an imposter, like you don't really belong there, that you're not good enough to do this. And to that, I too myself have dealt a lot with that. And that's where I came up with my alter ego. So certainly in our book, we have how to create one. So essentially it's about creating this character that has all of the attributes that you wish you had for your event, for example. So my alter ego is an MMA fighter. Think Conor McGregor. He doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks about him. He keeps on fighting no matter what, and he always gets up if he's been knocked down. So those are some qualities that I didn't have before that I really wanted to have for my sport. And so I created this alter ego, again, coming from an acting background, right? I watched a lot of videos of Conor McGregor, some of his behaviors, some of his body posture, the way he clenches his fist or he looks, some different talking patterns, music, all of those things, which we actually know in science, things like body posture actually has an impact on your hormones. It reduces cortisol levels, it increases other hormones in your body that can help. So, gosh, that's just a couple of things that we get into on the mental side.
Yeah, that's really good. And looking forward to a future episode where we can dig into more of that. One final question about triathlon and XTERRA in particular. I interviewed Melanie McQuaid, who I'm sure you've raced many times, a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago. Okay. And what impressed me about her is that she has been very successful both on the off-road scene and on-road in half and full distance triathlon. I'm just wondering how easy do you think is it to have success on both of those scenes? I mean, she's not the only one. Flora Duffy comes to mind, of course, and many others. But are those the rare exceptions, or is it similar enough that if you do a little bit of specific training, you can easily have success at both?
You can easily have success at both. I think what it ultimately comes down to is your joy for where your sport is. So, for example, I had a bunch of success in 70.3s early on, but I just didn't really love it the way that I do the off-road stuff. And so I chose to focus there. So I think if you still have a lot of joy for on-road, it's complementary. It can help your off-road, especially if you're doing things like 70.3s, because you get that durability, right? Because you're racing, 4, 5, 6 hours, right? That's going to be wonderful training at the right time of the season for your XTERRA. And equally, the XTERRA, the high intensity, the torque, the extremities of what you're having to deal with. If you then go and race a sprint distance or Olympic distance triathlon, you have so much durability and high intensity capability and mental toughness to deal with, the demands of that kind of racing.
Yeah, perfect. Then let's move into the rapid fire questions. So take just one sentence to answer these. And the first question is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon or endurance sports?
I like Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Yeah. That's I haven't read it. I have read a lot of her stuff, though. It's really important stuff. Yeah. What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
It is my facet ergometer for my swim. I love it.
All right. And finally, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
It is rewarding myself for the tough days. So making sure that I give myself a pat on the back when I do well, because too often we forget about all of that good stuff and we're always looking towards the future instead of being in the moment.
Yeah. Do you have any other reward other than a pat on the back? Do you
chocolate?
Have chocolate? Perfect. All right. Well, Lesley, this has been absolutely fascinating. I think I could talk for hours with you. I'm cool. so intrigued by everything that you've talked about. It's been really great. But for now, let's say goodbye and tell the listeners where they can follow you on social media and on the internet and find your coaching business and your book.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram, Lesley Does Try. And check out our website, braveheartcoach.com. The workout video I was telling you about, 6min6pack.com. And then our book is The Brave Athletes, Calm the F Down and Rise to the Occasion. And you can get that on Amazon, Audible, anything you like.
Yeah, and on Audible, you and Simon narrate it yourself.
We do.
So that's something that I always enjoy, that when authors read the book themselves on Audible, it always adds an extra touch of personality to it.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, Lesley. This has been
Pleasure.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, bud. Cheers. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com, where we will have links to Lesley's personal website and the Braveheart coaching website, as well as her social media. And the book is called The Brave Athlete, Calm the Fuck Down and Rise to the Occasion. It is written together with her husband, Simon Marshall. And as we mentioned in the interview, we are planning on having an interview with both Lesley and Simon on the specific topic of sports psychology in hopefully the not too distant future. And if XTERRA or Offroad Triathlon is your jam, then I would highly recommend that you go and listen to episode 196 of that triathlon show, which was an interview with Melanie McQuaid. Actually, I recommend anybody who hasn't listened to that interview go and listen to it, because Melanie was really one of my favorite interviewees of all time. And much like this interview, we did cover a lot of general training philosophies, not just relating to XTERRA. If you are looking for coaching services or training plans, you know where to go, scientifictriathlon.com. That's where we have all the information about that. And you can always send me an email and inquire if you have any further questions. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take their free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race. And get 15% off your order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, dry suits, swim skins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. And get 20% off your order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.